Hello. That was loud. Got a little wake up there. Cool.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our session, Managing Boundaries to Prevent Burnout. 3 years ago, we gave a workshop on mental health, and we had not very many people in the room. When I was walking in here, there was a queue to join us. I'm not sure whether that shows that actually there's more of a normalized conversation around mental health, or that actually things are worse, or perhaps it's something else. But anyway, we are really, really grateful to all of you for joining us today. Today's session is going to be a practical workshop where we share some of the tips that we've heard from people and we've employed ourselves around combating burnout and really implementing boundaries. So welcome again to all of you. Just for a moment, we're going to introduce ourselves because we often find it's quite helpful for you to know why we think we should be speaking about mental health with you. My name's Hannah Storm. I'm the founder and co-director of Headlines Network, and I've been a journalist for about 25 years. I've lived and worked and travelled in about 60 different countries, and I've worked across various forms of media. I've worked in journalism safety, mental health, online harassment, and at the intersection of all those things for the past 10 or 15 years. And about 5 years ago, I was diagnosed with complex post-traumatic stress disorder as a result of things related to my journalism. And for many, many years before that, I'd felt very, very isolated, very, very alone, like I was the only person in the world who had that experience. I felt very, very ashamed. Even now, 5 years on, my hands are getting slightly sweaty speaking about that experience. But I've spoken very openly about it and chosen to do so because I recognise I have a degree of privilege that many people don't have. I've just finished writing a book called Mental Health and Wellbeing for Journalists, which comes out next month. And some of the tips that I heard from 45 people I spoke with around the world will be sharing again today. So John and I work together on Headlines Network, and I'm going to hand over to him now to introduce himself.
Thank you, Hannah. Yes, I'm a journalist of 25 years standing. I've worked for local, national and international publications, including Newsweek and the Wall Street Journal. Like Hannah, I've had my personal mental health journey as well. About 5 or 6 years ago, when I left a job, I succumbed to burnout, and I was made redundant and asked to leave that role. And being a journalist is very much kind of bound up, I think, if you're a journalist in your identity. And I took it really badly, and I really crashed and burned. And actually, you know, we said this before, having spoken here, me and Hannah, we met actually here for the first time, and we would kind of turn up on panels talking to each other, and then we would resolve we need to do something about it. So it's really pleasing, as Hannah said, that there's a good group of you here today to listen to what we hope are some good insights and tips that we're going to deliver.
And we're going to be opening the floor to questions a little later on. We would encourage you, please, to keep them as questions. We are around if you'd like to have another chat about other things. Also, just to flag up, we're not clinicians, so we can't provide you therapy. We can chat as human beings and colleagues. However, what we've learned from listening to hundreds of journalists in the 4 years we've been running Headlines Network and working with dozens of news organisations, and what John and I individually have learned, I think it's really important to kind of set the tone now. Mental health needs to be a priority. It's not a priority right now. There's a piece of research done by Deloitte, the research firm based in the UK, specifically for UK industries, not specifically media, that says if you invest £1 proactively in mental health, you have a return on investment of £5.30. Not rocket science, folks. So we need to be normalising these conversations in newsrooms, and we're not doing that right now. As I said there, investing in mental health does save money. That's really hard though, right? Because so much of the narrative in the last few days has been about, you know, we're in this change process in news, there are so many job cuts taking place, there's so many people with so much on their plate and on their mind. We know that mental health is the other side of the coin from physical health. I've spent a lot of time working in very hostile environments from a safety perspective. We can't make sensible and helpful and effective decisions if our mental health is compromised, and that can impact our physical health and well-being too. And we all have mental health. We all have different experiences to it. I might have experienced something that you have a different reaction to, but it's also important to acknowledge that we all have reactions to difficult things as well. And critically, John and I recognise that we're sitting in front of you both as straight white people marginalised by our industry, in whatever way, shape or form that takes, often feel less able to speak about their experiences. People marginalised by nature of their identity or their role in the industry or their background or history as well. So it's really important, I think, to kind of acknowledge that. And we see more people burned out who fit into those kind of marginalised communities and identities as well.
So a little bit of housekeeping and some community guidelines. As Hannah said, there will be an opportunity towards the end to take some questions. This is an opportunity for you to pause, take a break. We've all been here in Perugia racing round from event to event and meetings, and it's very a fun thing to do, but hopefully you can take 50 minutes here just to give yourself a breather and practice some positive self-care. Hannah and I want to create positive connections across the industry, so please do come and speak to us afterwards if you'd like to do that. We're going to give you some actionable tips and insights and takeaways today. Please note that it is being recorded, and also that, you know, some of the things that we talk about may give you pause for thought if you've got personal experiences around that too. But as I said, questions will come later.
So we're going to ask you now if you would like to take out your phones. Most of the time, from a mental health perspective, we ask you to put down your phones. Please take that and take a picture of the QR code. And this is anonymous, okay? Completely anonymous. And we don't store your data or anything like that. And so we're just asking you, where do you fit on that slide of maybe you had too much wine in the bar and the Brifani last night?
That's why we've got a hungover option. As said, it is anonymous. But it's a good sense check, I think, for the room, just to see how everyone is feeling. And
actually, I often encourage news leaders and people running teams in newsrooms as well to do something similar. It might not be an interactive Slido, as this is called, but doing a bit of a temperature check at the start of meetings is often a really helpful way for people to recognise how they're going to come to a meeting and how they're going to come into a conversation. So 1/3 of you are, perhaps unsurprisingly for a workshop on burnout, exhausted. It's nice to see that slightly more people are happy and invigorated than they are broken, but I don't see the statistic for broken.
Yeah, that's right.
But it's lower down the chain of emotions. So that gives, I think, a sense of where people are, and it's encouraging also to see that kind of almost 1 in 5 of you are chilled as well.
I think that's the Perugia effect.
Is it the Perugia effect? Yeah, or the fact it's just been flipping freezing the last few days, right? So it might just be the temperature effect as well. We're going to move on to the next one. We'd love to hear from you where you are joining us from. Obviously, you're here in Italy, but which country are you from? Because we'd like to see this as a global conversation. And I think it really is. There are different contexts. And as I've seen from speaking to people around the world, there are different stigmas in many countries around the world. But it really is a global conversation. Australia, Italy, United Kingdom. Paris is not a country. Whoever's the journalist there, Paris is not a country. But thank you for that. Malta, Poland, Finland, Austria. This is brilliant. So this is a really nice cross-section. And again, recognising we're recording this, and so people who might be joining us at another time won't be able to interact, but hopefully it's a global conversation. As we said, I think we'll just leave it for one more moment as one. Yeah. France, but lives in London. You're just complicating things, aren't you folks?
Shout out for Jordan, Malta and Ukraine.
Yeah, thank you. We'll shout out for everywhere, but thank you very much, folks. So it's important for us, again, to just, create a bit of solidarity around the conversation too as well. So, John. Oh, that's me. This one's me, isn't it?
Yeah.
Got my list. I'm not very good at my list. If you want. So today, we want to talk a little bit today about why do we need to talk about this now? Why is it so important that we have this conversation now? What do we mean about burnout and boundaries? These are terms that you've probably heard a lot. We probably all have our own definitions personally around those. What does it feel like to be burnt out? Again, as I recognise, we all had different experiences of mental health, so we probably all have different experiences of burnout. How does it impact us individually and as journalists? And what can we do to prevent it?
And yeah, burnout can come and go. Our friend who we interviewed, Mark Little, says, burnout can be atmospheric. It depends on whatever day you wake up, and there may not be any rhyme or reason to it.
So why do we need this conversation right now? Right now in April of 2024, as you showed us at the beginning of the Slido, many people are exhausted. It's the last few years has brought this almost relentless capacity for breaking news. And the irony is, or perhaps it's not even ironic at all, but actually this news is breaking us as well, right? So this breaking news is breaking journalists. Our resources are limited, increasingly limited. More people are doing more work with fewer resources, and jobs are being cut left, right and centre. I heard some statistics the other day about just how significant that has been. We've had a blurring of our personal and professional lives. Our working environments have radically changed since COVID and onwards. As I said at the start, we recognise that need to speak about mental health. And, protecting journalists really does protect journalism. We strongly believe that journalists are journalism's most precious resource. And just as a nod to the last 6 months and 12 days, or 13 days, they have been particularly challenging for many people within our journalism community. And so there's been this cumulative effect, I think, of things over the past kind of few months and few years. And obviously, it wasn't before October the 7th, there were also still many different things taking place that were impacting people as well.
We were having a conversation today, Hannah and I, with someone about the need to protect journalists. And this person came back to us and said, there's a lot of work that's gone into downstream, which is, audience kind of trying to win memberships and all those things. And he said, what about upstream, the journalists? There's so much little attention on us. And if we can't do our jobs properly, then we can't serve our communities. So what do we mean by burnout? It was only recognised by the World Health Organization in 2019 as a workplace phenomenon. A lot of clinicians don't actually consider it a term, but it is something that I think we all know and recognise and feel. We've worked with the mental health charity Mind, Andrew Berry, who's their head of workplace wellbeing. We asked him just for a definition just to help us out, and I think this probably best sums it up. Burnout is a collection of experiences caused by long-term unmanageable stress at work. Untreated, it can affect our health and impact our work performance. And it's an occupational hazard now in work. It should be treated like that. Certainly in the UK now, there's a legal obligation in terms of providing a safe place for people's mental health to be okay in work. In journalism, news organisations, in fact, all across the UK, it is a requirement. And I'm sure in lots of other different countries as well, there's requirements as well there too. So I'd urge you, if you don't know the situation in your own country, we've seen all the countries that were flagged up to check it. Hannah and I would argue that there's a moral imperative why you should do it as well as a legal one. But very often, as we know, moral imperatives are not enough to get action in newsrooms.
And the thing I would say there is we reference employers. Well, John is a member, kind of one of the, what's your role at the SFJ?
Co-founder is the fancy name?
A co-founder of the Society for Freelance Journalists, and welcome to some of the members here. Freelancers are often by themselves. And one of the reasons the Society for Freelance Journalists was set up was to encourage a degree of solidarity and networking amongst freelance journalists. So I think that when it says burnout is an occupational hazard, I think that kind of occupational notion blurs slightly. Okay, it's not necessarily just the traditional newsroom workplace itself as well. So let's move on to the impact.
So these figures are actually, they don't pertain to journalism. There actually isn't any figures for journalism. Hannah and I would love to look into that a little bit more. And also these figures that were gleaned by our colleague Sarah Ward-Lilly, former managing editor of BBC. Actually, some of these go back to before the pandemic, so you can probably add a couple of tens onto these numbers. But it's just interesting to look in the wider population. 21% would call in sick rather than say they're struggling with stress. It's still a taboo, putting your hand up. And admitting that in journalism newsrooms, we're scared if we say that we won't be put on a job because we won't be considered strong enough, inverted commas, to deal with it. 14% of people have resigned because of workplace stress. Nearly over 4 in 10 are considering it. And 30%, this is something that pains both Hannah and me, so they can't talk openly to a line manager if they're feeling stressed.
So all of this, if you think about the impact it's having on us as individuals, all of this affects the communities we serve. Because if we can't be doing our journalism, or if certain types of people and individuals are impacted, it means that we can't do the kind of journalism that we really want to be doing. And I think I just kind of point out two things, actually, two highlights. The two overriding issues that came up as conclusions from the book I've just written one was, and to echo what John's just said, people are scared about speaking of their mental health experiences because they're concerned that they might not get the next deployment, the next promotion, that it might impact their reputation. I've had conversations with several people here during this conference who said the same thing. It's really important that people like Fergal Keane, who spoke today, speak openly about their mental health journey because it helps normalise it. But it's also really important to recognise that not everybody has that degree of platform and privilege to do so as well. So I think important to add there as well. We're going to move on to show you a video. We build and create resources because one of the things we learned at the start of Headlines was people want practical applications. So let's hear from a few of our colleagues in terms of what burnout feels to them.
And it includes Andrew Berry, who's describing that term.
Burnout to me is when you feel disconnected from the world, when you have nothing more to give because you've given so much already.
Our metaphorical cup has been filled to the brim. It's overflowing, and we need to take a moment to go and find a way to tip that cup out.
It's a little bit like a piece of rope, and the rope is frayed, and there are people pulling on it from different directions, and the rope is becoming increasingly frayed.
I told somebody at the time was that I was feeling a little crispy around the edges, and then the crisp began to spread until I was barely able to function at work.
I would say being overwhelmed is probably the word that springs to mind.
It's very individual. For each person, what burnout looks like will be different.
We all experience pressure at work and in our day-to-day lives, and when we don't, we're often bored and unmotivated. And when there's a little extra pressure, that's where we find our comfort zone and where we're challenged, we're able to realize that maximum performance. And we know we best perform in the longer term when we're able to kind of oscillate between that period of being stretched and then being able to return to that comfort zone and able to recharge. And when we're not able to recharge and that pressure continues to build, that's where we experience strain, and that's ultimately what causes stress.
As a clinician, I work with people who experience burnout, and essentially what burnout is we push our nervous system beyond its ability to cope. We don't recognize when our kind of internal messenger is trying to give us the memo that we need to stop and take a break.
The stress over a sustained long-term period at manageable levels is very much what we understand burnout to be.
So I'm not sure how many of those elements, descriptions, aspects resonate with people, but I mean, they certainly, you saw me in the kind of my frayed rope analogy there. I forget things when I'm burnt out. I can start a sentence and halfway through the sentence, it may also be because I'm a menopausal woman, but it probably is more likely to be burnout. I get halfway through the sentence and suddenly it's like, oh, actually I can't remember where I was going with this. And so as James said there, this kind of metaphorical, and I often use these analogies with John. So his water bottle is better there actually. He's got a lot less in his water bottle right now. If, for instance, if John's emotional load is there, okay, and people keep topping things in life keep being poured in. It might be personal things, it might be work things, they keep getting poured in. He's probably got a bit more capacity, I'm not saying this is in real life, but than I have here, which I've got very little space in my water bottle. So I think an awareness of where we are in our emotional water bottles or loads is probably really helpful in helping us deal with burnout.
And where individuals are, and that we're all different.
Exactly. So, so just kind of moving on to the boundaries aspect. It took me a long time I heard about boundaries a lot, And it took me a long time to kind of really understand that ultimately boundaries were really important in my life. And boundaries are basically, the best way I can understand them is they're the limits that I create to protect myself, that I create and communicate with other people to protect myself. So it's recognizing where my professional life ends and where my personal life starts. It's recognizing where parts of my professional life end and other parts start. It's being able to say no. And actually, that can be really flipping scary sometimes, saying no. And actually, it takes a lot of practice sometimes. And actually, sometimes we're so scared of saying no, it's like, well, what's the worst that can happen? I keep saying to myself, what's the worst that can happen if I say no? And generally, the worst that can happen is actually better than if I continued down that route towards burnout. So they're the limits, as I said, we create to protect ourselves. When we set them and communicate them with other people, they show how we wish to be treated. We can't control, as John and I speak a lot of the time about, in mental health terms, let's focus on what we can control. We can't always control the situation. We can't always kind of control the boundaries, to be honest, but we can control a lot of them and communicate them with other people. Boundaries can be physical. So, for instance, I have a bit of a space issue sometimes, so I don't really want to be that close to certain people. I feel like people are in my space, so that's my physical boundary as well. They can be emotional in terms of how I, want people to treat me, I suppose. And they express my needs, desires, and preferences. And at any given time, they might differ, right? But I might generally have a standard of kind of how I want those boundaries to be manifesting. So what can we do as individuals? So John has heard me say this many times, and maybe some of you here have as well. Mental health in English begins with 2 letters, and the 2 letters are M and E. And in English, that word is me. And so basically, mental health begins with me. And that can feel like a really selfish thing to do, particularly in journalism, when we're amplifying the amazing stories and the extraordinary experiences that other people face. But we're no good to anybody else unless we look after ourselves. And so as individuals, we need to recognize our responsibilities and priorities. I did a panel yesterday with Professor Anthony Feinstein, and we talked about moral injury. And at the heart of moral injury is being able to understand where our roles begin and end as journalists as well. So it's recognizing our responsibilities and priorities, and when we might say no. It's also asking for help. It can be really hard, can't it? Really hard asking for help. Really scary, actually, as well, and really isolating if we know we need to ask for help, but we're too scared to do so, and where to go for it. But a lot of the time, human beings by nature generally want to help others. And so actually asking for help if we need it is really important. And then the stuff which is kind of like self-care and mental health 101, and sometimes I feel a bit embarrassed reminding people of this, but really critical. Taking breaks. Making breaks during our work, whether we're doing stuff which exposes us to the potential for vicarious trauma, so distressing imagery, or whether we are doing something more mundane, or whether we're out somewhere covering a story, we need to remind ourselves to take breaks and eat and hydrate. And it can feel like we're in a, our job's so important, I can't possibly take my leave or my holiday. Well, sometimes, no, we can't right now. But actually ensuring we take that leave. Nobody's going to give you prizes for not taking your holiday or your leave. And as a freelancer as well, that can be really difficult too, because it tends to be feast or famine for work as well. So where we can do that intentionally, super important. And that intentional point there as well, we're all addicted. Well, I don't know where there it is. We're all addicted to these things, aren't we? Right? To this point that actually, it feels like an extra limb, an extra part of our body. And that again can feel really scary. During COVID, we were all disconnected from each other, but hyper-connected to these. And so intentionally closing these, putting these away, turning these off, knocking off our notifications. Yes, we are important. We like to think we're very important, don't we? But we are important, and our journalism is important. But we need to kind of create those spaces to kind of turn those off at certain times.
And it will be okay if you just miss that notification. If somebody really wants to get hold of you, they will do the old school thing and ring the phone.
Yeah. So I think, but again, trying these slowly sometimes is really helpful, right? Trying them one small thing at a time. So there's the me in mental health. There's our wonderful colleague, designer colleague Mary, who has created my little flower fairy lady in the, reminding ourselves that we are flowers and plants as well, that we need watering, we need hydrating, we bloom in the sunshine, we have quieter times. We were talking about that when we were coming in with Rana about flourishing. We flourish, but we also need to have times to hibernate and take stock as well. And many of you will have flown, and that airline safety briefing about putting your own oxygen mask on first, super important in journalism and boundary terms as well. I see a lot of people out there talking the talk, but fewer people talking the talk and walking the walk. And that's hard as well, right? So I think kind of that sense of walking the walk and talking the talk is something that can help us be kind of more in tune with ourselves as well. And this is really important. You know, I'm really tired today. Somebody said to me, "Oh, Hannah, you look really tired." And I was like, I am really tired. It's okay to have tired days. It's okay to have crappy days. It's okay to feel a bit shit about things. Sorry for the bad language. But actually, it's also okay to admit that. And that can feel really, really kind of vulnerable as well. But we're not all going to have super duper happy days all the time. The sun will rise and the sun will set. And sometimes the sun will be behind the cloud. And I think recognizing that is important. And that point that I mentioned before about my sweaty palms, which are less sweaty now because I'm not talking about PTSD, it's taking time to notice and recognize and be aware of our physical responses as well and our kind of psychological responses too. So we've referenced these already, some of these. John plays football. He always tells me it's to a really bad level, but I don't think it is to a really bad level. So exercise is really crucial for both of us, isn't it?
It is, absolutely. And yeah, you're just getting away from everything. When I am playing football to a bad standard, I forget everything else that's happening in my life, and I'm incredibly happy because of it. Again, this, it may feel like journalism 101, but the way that journalists kind of seeps its way into our lives, where it's all encompassing, where we may be under pressure if we're in a newsroom in terms of presenteeism, where we're freelancers and we feel that we just have to keep at it and at it because we're really scared about where the next gig is coming from. By taking that break, you will commit better journalism after it.
And the last one there is go back, please. Thank you. And the last one says breathing. Okay, again, told me something I didn't know. But actually, let me remind you that breathing is really, really important. And when we say breathing, we don't just mean the fact that we're all kind of deep breathing really shallowly most of the time because we're really quite stressed and wound up. Finding time to concentrate, and Mind gave us this fantastic, doesn't work for people who have vertigo, what I'm about to say. There are other ways of breathing when you need to focus and concentrate for like 60 seconds. But Mind gave us this fantastic tip where basically you draw a rectangle around the edge of your laptop. So if you've got your laptop in front of you, you breathe in across the top and you breathe out down the bottom. And you breathe in across the bottom and out up the top. So you're tracing your eyes along the laptop and just breathing in and out, and generally breathing in and out for just concentrating mindfully on that for a few seconds in each inhalation and exhalation. It's a reminder of kind of grounding ourselves as well. So next slide, please. Oh, so we've heard a lot of this in the last few days, this idea that, and we all know how important journalism is. And I think just reminding ourselves again that actually it is important, that our work has purpose. And again, going back to listening to Fergal before, Fergal was talking about the golden age of journalism and how he believes that really now journalism is even more critical, I think, than ever before. Our work is really important. We're bearing witness to some things that are pretty significant. We're holding power to account. We're in a year now where there are extraordinarily complicated and polarizing elections around the world. It's really important, but we are also really important. We can't do our journalism if we're not well enough to do so. We have a fantastic group of people here. We've all been connecting with our friends and colleagues, so reminding ourselves of the people around us and how they kind of help give us oxygen to our mental health and well-being. And then just a reminder again of controlling what we can control. There's a fantastic person called Dr. Kate McMahon who used to head up the DART Centre Asia Pacific. And in the book that I wrote recently, we were talking about covering the climate emergency. And she was talking about how overwhelming that can be for people's mental health. How on earth, in a kind of with a crisis such as this, how can you manage as a journalist to do what you can do? And she said, we focus on the things we can control, and we focus on the stories that we can cover. And each part of us has a part of that jigsaw to be able to do so. And so, no, maybe we can't change the immediate weather, we can't change government policy with one particular story, but over time, we can play a role in that.
And accepting that can be liberating.
Yes.
Trying something outside of journalism.
So when you go to somebody and you introduce yourself to somebody, right, how often do you actually say, hello, I'm Hannah Storm, I'm a journalist? Because I used to do that all the time. Yeah? And that was my entire identity, absolute entire identity. And that was not healthy for me, because imagine if you were David Beckham and you went up to everybody and you went, hey, David, well, of course you're David Beckham. Hey, David Beckham, I'm a footballer. But all of a sudden you get injured and you can't be a footballer anymore. And then you have no identity left, right? So it's really important for us to have something else. So I write. I also do this weird sport called duathlon, which is like running, cycling, and then running again, because one lot of running isn't enough, apparently. But we all need to find something outside of our journalism as well. So I would encourage you to think about, what is the thing outside of your journalism that you would like to try or that you try? What's yours?
Football.
Oh, yeah, right. Is there anything else? Is it just, I'm a footballer and I'm a journalist?
No, there's other things, but...
I would put him on the spot now and embarrassed him. But yeah, there's lots of other fantastic things John does, like you go to the theatre quite a lot, don't you?
Yeah.
Yeah. I've embarrassed you, sorry.
No, you haven't, don't worry.
But think about what is the kind of other thing outside of your journalism that you like to do, and creative practice. Like somebody was telling me, I was working with a group of journalists from Ukraine a couple of weeks ago, and we were talking about what's your other thing. And some of the people were crocheting. And I was like, oh, that's lovely. It's kind of like, because you're so focused on this thing, this creative art, this thing, that it just kind of brings your mind so to that point.
But that's what's happened to me when I succumbed to
Crocheting?
burnout. I was saying, no, not crocheting, no. Maybe that's something I should take up.
Yeah.
No, it was the fact that, being that journalist, describing yourself, just what you said there as being a journalist, it's so bound up in our identities, and we all know why. We're holding people, power, institutions to account. But yeah, just to have another avenue, another place to go that we can get passionate about is so important.
Exactly. And so just very, very quickly on our last self-care before we move on. Again, the reminder to take breaks, switching off. I don't know what switch off or reduce means. Switching off or reducing our exposure to social media, limiting our engagement with platforms. Just very quickly on the meetings thing. I don't know how many of you kind of feel like you're just back to back in meetings. You have no time for anything in between the meetings. In the olden days, pre-COVID, we would be able to walk between meetings. Sometimes if we're working remotely now, it's like, okay, meeting finishes at 4:01, new meeting starts 1 minute before. So it's just bam, bam, bam. So intentionally being mindful about that. I put a meeting with myself in the diary. Every Friday, I have a lunch meeting with myself, which sounds a bit weird perhaps, but it allows me to block out that time for me to do something that I need to do. Recognising the boundaries between home and work life, very difficult if you work predominantly from home and remotely, but really important. Drew, who you saw in the video from Mind, talks about having some kind of ceremony. So it's actually like you've got your laptop and you close your laptop, or some people light a candle, or
It's just something to bookend your working day. And when we were working at home during the pandemic, just the day would stretch out. So it's really, Hannah was talking earlier about intentionality. Just like put the laptop down, put the computer down, have some kind of ceremony. And I said, it will be okay. It will be, go back there tomorrow and commit better journalism by doing it. And if somebody wants to get hold of you, they can ring you.
And on the final point on this slide, I hear a lot of the time, and we will all hear a lot of the time, oh, but my problem isn't as bad as that person's problem. We know there's some horrific things going on around the world, and some people are in such significant trauma, it's really impossible for us to understand how that might be. But that doesn't mean that our own experiences aren't valid. And I think comparison can be the enemy of compassion. And I think kind of creating a compassionate space where we can look after ourselves and realise that our experiences are still valid. I would encourage us all to kind of think about that as well. On the comparison level, John.
Yes, but we were talking about things you can control and things you can't control, and certainly managers might fall into the group in terms of things that you can't control. You know, I think we should all accept now, particularly with regards to mental health, that managers are expected to support their teams. Hannah and I do training for managers, and we realised that it's really hard for them as well. There's that old cliche, it's kind of lonely at the top. And they are dealing with lots of pressures coming at them from all angles. But also, it's really difficult for them to maybe sometimes open up, to admit vulnerability and talk about burnout, particularly when they're working in macho newsrooms. You know, Hannah has spoken about the oxygen mask. That is a great analogy. It's the same for managers as well. They feel a lot of pressure. There might be some in here where, you know, you have to look after your staff's newsroom, you're responsible for them, but you really can't help them until you help yourself. Once you've done that, you need to, you know, model good behavior. So that can be in terms of communication, ensuring that your staff have boundaries, that they do put their phones down, really put it down. Please don't work beyond, you know, certain hours unless it's absolutely necessary and it's a crisis. And, you know, communicate your ways of coping as well. Just saying, I find it hard, this is what I do. I play football or I crochet or whatever that thing may be, just to show, you know, that you're a human being as well and that you're under pressure too. We all know that journalism is fast-paced and it's dynamic, and that's why we got into it, because we love that. You know, that you're covering that first page, that first draft of history, but we just can't let it get to, as what Drew says, are unmanageable levels.
So yeah, we've got a few moments for questions. We're going to encourage in a moment. We've got another Slido coming up, another question we're going to ask you, but it's something that you need to type in. So in the meantime, in the interest of time, we've got about 5 or 6 minutes where we can take questions. Could you make them questions, please, rather than statements, if that's okay? And if you're happy to identify yourself, that would be super as well. I see one at the back there. I don't know if we have a microphone. Yes, we do. Thank you.
Hi, Annette Young from France 24, and I'm of the generation which was suck it up. So this is very quickly 2 questions to both of you, and also to thank you for your incredible work. One thing Fergal Keane said earlier today was he was very much encouraged by the younger generation being more emotionally literate, and I'd like to get your feedback on that. Is there a generational difference in the way in which we deal with burnout? Secondly, have you ever thought of holding day or weekend sessions for journalists learning how to switch off? I know you've got a lot on your plate already, but I'm just going to put it out there in case you might have considered that as a possibility.
Probably quickly on your second point, I would love to do that. If anybody would like to fund it, please come to us. Absolutely love to do that. On your first point, and I know John's probably got things to do and say in this regard. So we're both Gen Xers, and obviously there's various different generations within newsrooms. We see a marked difference between Gen X and boomers and Gen Z and millennials generally. It's not always that helpful to generalize. Again, in the book, and I was in New York last week working with a news organization there, we saw this big difference between that emotional literacy that you talk about, Annette, there. People come to newsrooms and start their careers recognizing that mental health is as important as physical health, and with the tools and tips in their toolbox in terms of that language. A lot of the time they hit the buffers, as it were, because they've had some pastoral care at university, but they come into these kind of organizations, and exactly to your point, it's like, well, in my day, we were just expected to get on with it and man up and toughen up and, you know, stiff up a lip and all of that stuff. So I strongly believe that actually there's a really important learning conversation to be had between the 2 generations. Yes, younger people probably need training around, here are some of the things you're going to be exposed to potentially as a journalist. And then perhaps people who are slightly older sit down and listen to, how do you manage your boundaries? Because younger people, I have a 17, 18-year-old daughter, nearly 18-year-old daughter. She's very good on her boundaries and she's very strict on them. So I think there's a really important learning to be had from kind of both sides as well, but it's definitely something we see. Do you want to pick up on that?
Yeah, just Gen Zs are providing the groundswell of change for this conversation because they're so much more, as you say, Annette, are adept and articulate at emoting their feelings. And as Hannah was saying there, they've kind of received that support probably in university or colleges. Whether that support has been good enough, that's one for another debate, but they come in with that expectation. And then they walk into a newsroom and they're almost laughed at, you know, when they go, well, where's my mental health support? And one of our first workshops that we did, we worked with lots of different cohorts, including new entrants. And, you know, she spoke to us when she joined quite a big news organisation in the UK. She said to her line manager, right, this is our first mental health check-in. We're going to have one every fortnight. And I'm fine for now, but I'll see you in 2 weeks. And she left the line manager, you know, slightly dumbfounded because, you know, that isn't something that journalists would normally say and put their head above the parapet to do. But yeah, you're absolutely right. Our generation, perhaps Annette, myself and Hannah, we're taught to suck it up. And it was kind of part of your DNA. You put on the suit of armour, you're bearing witness, but you don't become the story. So squash your feelings, even to the point that, you know, that it's not even there. So I think that's even more particular in journalism where that happens, because you're told never become the story. And things are changing, and that change is coming directly from Gen Zs. I would completely agree with you, and I would echo Hannah on the funding.
On the funding, yes. Any other questions? Just while we take a couple of questions at the front, I would say that people are going to vote with their feet. Young people are going to vote with their feet. They're not going to hang around if an organisation doesn't have the kind of wherewithal and the smarts to kind of look after their mental health. So, yes, Rana, go ahead.
I wanted to ask you, how do you deal as an employee with a boss or bosses that generally thrive on burnout and have a character where if they don't burn you out in the process, then you can't touch them? How do you basically start by reforming top-bottom and not bottom-top?
Yeah, do you want to take that?
Yeah, you know, we've all been in difficult situations, I'm sure, with newsroom managers where, you know, with the best will in the world, you can't get through to them what they're doing. And, you know, let's face it, it's changing, but certainly in my younger day, the people that tended to get promoted to become managers were the ones who worked the bloody hardest. That was seen as your management material because you're there all the time. You're almost giving up your life. So it's hard sometimes getting through to those people, particularly if they've, you know, they might think, I've done the hard yards, why shouldn't anybody else? So if you can't get through to that person, I mean, look, as we've seen, the world is changing. There's allies in there. It might not be a direct line manager, but it might be a figure of authority in that organization who gets it. Have that conversation, you know, or you can come together if you're kind of scared of putting your own head personally above the parapet. You can come together as a group if you're in a newsroom and just say, we would like to have a conversation about how mental health is protected. And as we were saying earlier, you know, in lots of countries now, it's a legal requirement. So it's not about you need to do the right thing and hold yourself to a higher standard. Legally, you have to protect people's mental health in many countries.
Let's take one more question. I think, Sam, you've got a question, and then we're going to move on, if that's okay. Go ahead, Sam.
Yeah, thanks, both of you. Great panel. Sam Dobley from Human Rights Watch. My question's about changing culture within organizations. So you've talked a lot about the individual responsibility of managers. And I think organizations getting good at having the box ticking, kind of the legal requirements. But I think it's a lot more about changing culture within an organization. And I just wondered if you had any tips on those of us fighting for those of us trying to change cultures.
Yeah, and I'm very conscious that you've done some great work yourself in changing culture. I think a lot of it does come from the leadership. So kind of leading and communicating and recognizing that you have human beings around you and that these people are not cogs in a machine. So kind of, you know, trying to encourage these spaces where people feel as safe as possible, but sometimes that's about you making yourself more vulnerable as a leader as well. I think it's also kind of just recognizing and reminding people that their work is really valuable and valid. You know, just kind of thanking people for doing things, taking a few seconds to just acknowledge somebody's done something extraordinary or somebody's going through something difficult. We don't all need to walk around with our hearts on our sleeves, but I think the cultural thing is super duper important. And actually just, it's that sense of leading from the top, normalizing the conversations, helping people feel safe, but also recognizing that you don't have all the answers. And that there are other people within your organization who, I often use the jigsaw puzzle analogy, but different people will have different jigsaw puzzle pieces, if that's right. And actually then to that point of we're all different, so kind of acknowledging the privilege we have and the fact that we won't necessarily be able to speak from every perspective. But this is so bound up in the whole kind of change thing that we're dealing with as journalists as well, that I think it's important to recognize that mental health, diversity, equity and inclusion and change are all things which are very, very closely related. Let's move on to the kind of final interaction from you that we'd like to ask you for. We would like to ask you, based on what you've heard today or what you've kind of experienced recently, one specific thing. So again, this is for your phone. We're going to give you another QR code in a moment. One specific self-care tip.
It's the same one.
You would like to, same QR code, sorry. One thing you would like to practice. You will have to type this in. The reason we do this is actually often people share amazing pieces of that jigsaw again. And that, you can take a picture of this at the end if you'd like to and take this home with you, because you might have 3 or 4 or 5 things that are shared by people in the room here that you've never thought of and that maybe you'd like to try. And maybe they'll work for you next week or maybe tomorrow or maybe next year, but certainly I would encourage you to leave your work at work.
And it's about,
Yes,
and it's,
ice
go
cream.
for it. But it's about intentionality. There's intentionality there for you, but it's about resolving to do something rather than, maybe I'll change it. Actually,
Okay,
go
this
to
may well be the new campaign, Never Work for Idiots hashtag. Thank you. Fund headlines to do a switch off workshop. Can somebody stick that in there as well, please?
Annette, that was you, wasn't it? No.
And somebody said walk in nature with my dog, and I just want to pick that out because actually I found some real release and relief in spending more time in nature. I don't have a dog, but I think that, that can be incredibly helpful as well.
This is brilliant.
So thank you, everybody. Saying no, breathing, longer breaks, breathing minutes, meetings day 10, okay? I'm not entirely sure what some of these are, but this is more hobbies, have an ice cream. I'm sure you should be able to put ice cream down on expenses if it's for your well-being, right? Putting the phone down and reading a book. But you can see here that there's a whole raft of fantastic things that people have shared with us. I know we laugh a little, but actually laughter is quite good, right? The other thing I do sometimes with my kids is I do a kitchen disco. So we choose the most crappy, cheesy song possible. And for 3 or 4 minutes on a Friday, we dance around the kitchen like, I would never want anyone to video that, but like strange people. So it's also really good fun. So thank you. I think that is, one more person is typing there. We have about 1 more minute. We're just going to share with you now. So take a picture. Oh, I was going to say take a picture of that, but it's take a picture of that if you'd like to. And again, just maybe hold on to that and think occasionally about one self-care thing you might try. I promise you, the more you practice these things, the easier it gets. A bit like brushing your teeth or running or things like that, which kind of seem a bit difficult at the start. John, guidelines.
Yeah, so we do resources across many different subjects. We do illustrative written guides. We've got a podcast that we've successfully run talking to people about their own mental health, and we've got animated videos as well. And we're working on one to do with hybrid working as we speak. We'd love to speak with any funders out there who'd like to help us a little bit more on other work that we're doing. You can find all that at headlines-network.com. which is really important here, Hannah, in terms of signposting before we go.
As I said, we're not doctors or clinicians. Please, if you are struggling or worried about your mental health or somebody else's, please encourage them or you yourself to seek help from your family doctor. Some companies have employee assistance programs, EAPs. Private therapy can be hard and difficult to access, but if you can afford it, It's really been helpful for me. And mental health helplines, but also networks of support and solidarity. An amazing one here. We have a WhatsApp group, some of us in Perugia, where we share a whole load of stuff, which has been really, really beneficial for a lot of us. So without further ado, since our time's up, thank you so much for joining us. Please stay in touch with us if you've got anything else.
Right on time. It's like on the minute. Like, wow. How do we do that?
I was very, like, at the end, I've got really sweaty hands now.
Hey, hello.
Hello.
Cheers.
Hi.